You are 8 years old, and the world has just ended. The night is shattered by the sound of boots on cobblestone and the metallic scrape of swords being unsheathed. You hear your mother screaming your name, clinging to you with a strength you didn't know she had, until rough hands rip you away. You fight, you kick, you bite, but it doesn't matter. You're a child. The men dragging you wear the Sultan's seal. The torchlight makes the trees of your Balkan village look like demons. Women wail, fathers are beaten. The soldiers work, quickly, methodically, as if this horror has been rehearsed 1,000 times before, because it has. This is the Devshirm, the child levy. You try to turn back. You see your mother on the ground, held down by soldiers, her voice breaking with your name, and then you are shoved into a line of boys, dozens of them. Some older, some as young as you, all wide-eyed, all trembling. You are told not to look back. You look back anyway, and that is the last time you will ever see your mother's face. The march begins. Days blur together into dust, sweat, and sobbing. The older boys whisper in Greek, in Albanian, and Slavic tongues you half understand. Warning of what comes next. They tell you about Istanbul, about the palace, about the knife. You don't want to believe them, but their terror needs no translation. Some of the soldiers call it an honor. They say you will be educated, trained, brought close to the Sultan himself. But the boys who've heard the stories shake their heads. They whisper that most of you will not survive. They whisper that you will be changed forever. The truth, though you don't know it yet, is worse than either version. You are not seen as a child. You are not even seen as human. You're raw material, a commodity. You are one entry in a ledger of investments that will either pay off for the empire, be discarded as waste. Already the weak begin to fall. A boy named Thomas, tall for his age, collapses from fever. He cries out for his mother, clutching at the dirt. The soldiers do not stop. They let him die in the dust. By nightfall, his body is left behind, and the line keeps moving. That is the first time you realize that children are expendable. You are expendable too. Trauma begins immediately. You are forbidden to speak your language. You are forced to answer to a new name, a Turkish name. The guards laugh when you slip back into your mother tongue, and they strike you across the mouth. They tell you that your family is dead to you. And for all practical purposes, it is true. Some boys try to resist. One night, a boy named Edward tries to run. He makes it past the guards, sprinting into the blackness of the forest. You all hold your breath, willing him to escape. But moments later, a scream cuts through the night. He is dragged back by his hair. In front of everyone, the soldiers beat him so badly that by morning he can no longer walk. He is left behind, moaning in the dirt, and the column moves on. Suicide becomes common. The youngest boys sometimes slip into rivers, sometimes refuse to eat, sometimes bash their heads against rocks until blood seeps out. The Ottoman records themselves, cold and detached, describe these deaths as acceptable losses in the acquisition of human material. The march can last weeks, sometimes months. You pass burned-out villages, mountains shrouded in mist, rivers, that smell of decay, and with every step, you feel yourself hollowing out. Your memories of home begin to blur as though your childhood were already fading into someone else's life. When at last you glimpse the skyline of Istanbul, it feels like another planet. The domes and minarets pierce the sky. The city hums with life. But for you and the boys beside you, it is not a city. It is a machine that will grind you down and remake you. The first thing that happens is the sorting. You're marched into a courtyard and inspected like cattle. Men in fine robes circle you, peering at your teeth, touching your skin, forcing you to strip. You try to cover yourself, but your arms are slapped away. You are a specimen now, and specimens don't get to feel shame. The officials take notes, their quills scratching on parchment. They divide the boys into groups. Some are sent to farms, some to military barracks, and then there are the special ones. It's the handsome, the strong, the intelligent. These are marked for palace service. Feels like a blessing at first, being chosen for the palace, but you do not yet know the price. You do not yet know about the procedure. At night, you hear whispers from the older boys. The word passes from mouth to mouth. Castration. Some call it purification. Some call it mutilation. No one explains it to you fully. The fragments are enough to keep you awake. Knives, fire, screaming. One boy, William, tries to reassure you. He says not all of you will face it, that some are sent to train as soldiers instead. But even as he speaks, his hands tremble. He doesn't believe his own words. When morning comes, you are taken to the next stage of the process. A dark chamber, the smell of iron and oil in the air. The walls echo with sounds that no child should ever hear. And it is here, finally, that you begin to understand. What waits for you in Istanbul is far worse than chains, far worse than hunger. It is a transformation so violent so final that the child who entered this city will never walk out again. You wake in the cold, the sound of iron clinking outside your chamber. The air is thick with smoke and something bitter you cannot place. The boys are silent now. No one dares whisper. You feel the fear pressing in, heavier than the stone walls themselves. Somewhere in this labyrinth of Istanbul's palace, children are screaming, and you finally understand why the older ones begged for death on the road. The physicians arrive without ceremony. They wear plain robes, their faces unreadable, like carpenters preparing to carve wood. Only here, the wood is you. You are stripped, examined once again, your arms held in place as if you might bolt. Officials nod to each other, and with that nod, your fate is sealed. They call it a medical procedure. They call it a purification. But let's not light was mutilation. It was the systematic destruction of boyhood, repeated for centuries, carried out with the precision of an assembly line. And here is the statistic no one wants to imagine. Between 70 and 90% of boys subjected to it never walked out alive. Imagine a schoolroom full of children. Now erase nearly all of them. That was the real mathematics of the Ottoman palace. The process begins with starvation. Days of near-empty bowls, a deliberate weakening, so that when the knives come, your blood runs slower. Some boys are so delirious they beg for food, not knowing it is better to die hungry than to survive what comes next. When the day arrives, you are tied down to a wooden table. Surface is scarred with grooves where others before you thrashed in agony. You try to kick, you try to scream, but your voice is muffled by cloth shoved into your mouth. For silence, you are a project, not a person. The knife flashes, both testicles are removed, then the penis. It's no anesthesia, no mercy. Hot irons or boiling oil are pressed against the wound, the smell of burning flesh filling the chamber. The pain is not describable, it is beyond pain. It's obliteration. Some boys' hearts stop right there. Others bleed out within minutes. For a few, infection seeps in later, and death lingers for days. You might ask, why would an empire do this? Why turn children into corpses with such reckless brutality? The answer is simple and chilling, because the survivors were worth more than gold. A boy who lived through this nightmare became something the palace prized above armies. Above. Jules, a eunuch, was not just a servant. He was a guarantee. He could not father children, could not found dynasties, could not betray the sultan with ambitions of his own bloodline. He was loyal precisely because his body had been destroyed. And so, for every 100 boys carved apart, the 10 who staggered back from the edge of death were considered treasures. Survivors were dressed, bathed, and tended like prized racehorses. Their wounds festered, their bodies twisted, but they lived. And living meant service. Do you remember William, the boy, who tried to reassure you on the march? He lies beside you now, his face as pale as wax, eyes staring at the ceiling. He does not speak anymore. The physicians say he is strong enough to serve. But when you look at him, you see a boy who died on that table and left only a shell behind. The weeks that follow are agony. You can barely urinate. Your body swells with fevers. Some nights, the moans of dying boys echo so loudly it feels like the palace itself is weeping. And yet, the physicians keep working. They change bandages. They cauterize wounds again and again, as though patching up broken tools. Because that's what you are now, a tool. But survival does not mean freedom. Survival means you are escorted into another chamber, given a simple robe, and told that from now on, you belong to the Sultan's household. You will eat when they feed you. You will speak when they command you. You will forget the name your mother gave you. And here comes the cruelest twist of all. The palace you now enter is not a dungeon. It is dazzling. Marble floors, gold inlaid walls. It's perfumed air drifting from gardens where fountains sing. You are surrounded by beauty and reminded every moment that none of it is yours. You may guard the Sultan's wives, but never touch them. You may hold the keys to the harem, but never cross its threshold, except as a shadow. You may walk through halls where princes are born, but you yourself will never father a child. Isn't that the genius of it? To mutilate a child and then imprison him in paradise, so that every glance, every whisper, every smile reminds him of what he has lost. And yet, there's another layer, because while most eunuchs serve in silence, some rise. Some climb the hierarchy until they become almost as powerful as the Sultan's viziers. The palace whispers of men like Henry, once a Christian boy stolen from his village, now the Sultan's confidant. He controls appointments, decides who rises and who falls. He walks with power that emperors respect, but at night alone, he is still the boy who bled on that table. The system is brilliant in its cruelty. The palace takes your body, breaks it, then offers you a sliver of power in return. Many take it. What else can they do? But the boy, were is gone. All that remains is survival. Now ask yourself this. What would you do in such a place? Would you cling to your stolen childhood? Or would you bury it so deep you could serve the Sultan with a smile? How many would trade their pain? For influence? For silk robes? For the illusion of belonging? And this is only the beginning. Because as broken as you feel now, as hollow as your chest is, the real torment of the eunuch's life isn't what was done with knives. It's what comes after the endless years of service inside the palace walls, where beauty mocks you, power tempts you, and loneliness eats at your soul until you wonder if you are still human at all. You wake to the call of the muezzin, echoing through marble halls, a sound that should mean peace, but instead reminds you that another day has begun. In the prison of paradise, you are no longer the boy from your Balkan village. That child was buried the day you were tied to the table. You're something else now, instrument of the Sultan's will. Dressed in silk that hides scars no one will ever mention aloud. The palace is magnificent, almost blinding. Courtyards filled with orange blossoms, fountains that seem to whisper secrets, golden mosaics glittering in the morning light. The air carries the fragrance of roses and honey cakes. But beauty here is a weapon. Every glance at the gardens reminds you that your own lineage ends with you. Every sound of children playing in hidden courtyards cuts like a knife, because, none will ever call you father. You serve in the harem, the hidden world of the Sultan's wives and concubines. It is both a fortress and a gilded cage. The rules are strict. No man enters, except the Sultan himself. No man except you and the others like you. You are trusted to guard the women precisely because you can never touch them. Your mutilation is your qualification. Your pain is your passport. At first, you are little more than a shadow fetching water, carrying messages, cleaning silks. The women hardly notice you, gossip about each other, plot for influence, sing lullabies to their children. You hear it all but remain invisible. That is the role. To see without being seen, to exist without ever belonging. But some eunuchs climb higher. You hear whispers of men like Thomas, stolen from a Greek village, who rose to control the entire harem. He holds the keys, decides who may visit the Sultan, manages every coin that passes through these chambers. They call him Kisler Akatha, chief black eunuch. His signature alone can make or break the future of entire families. Ministers bow to him. Princes respect him. Even the Sultan listens when he speaks. Imagine that in empire where the most powerful man after the Sultan is one who cannot even call himself a man in the eyes of nature. Yet do not mistake power for freedom. For every Thomas who rises, there are dozens who remain stuck in silence. Forever attendants, forever ghosts. And even Thomas cannot escape the mirror. At night when he is alone in his chambers, no silk robe, no treasure, no whispered respect can erase what was taken from him as a child. Power without legacy is an empty throne. Do you see the irony? The Sultan's palace was filled with the most beautiful women in the empire. The men chosen to guard them were those who could never desire them. Eunuchs stood among luxury, but lived in permanent deprivation. They witnessed every marriage, every birth, every act of intimacy from the outside. They were guardians of life, yet forever denied life's most basic joys. What happens to a man when he is surrounded by desire, but stripped of the ability to feel it? Some collapsed into despair. Palace records describe eunuchs who wasted away, refusing food until their bodies failed. Others poured their longing into service, becoming fanatically loyal, hoping devotion would numb the ache. A few found twisted solace in cruelty, lording their small authority over the women and boys below them. Pain, after all, seeks an outlet. But some created their own worlds. Eunuchs formed surrogate families among themselves, older ones mentoring the young, bonds that mimicked the kinship they had lost. These networks became lifelines. Young eunuch might never again hear his mother's lullaby. He would hear an older brother's advice whispered in the dark. It was not blood, but it was survival. And still the question haunts. Would you choose power if it came chained to mutilation? Imagine being Henry, once a boy with dirt on his knees and laughter in his voice, now a gatekeeper to the Sultan himself. Courtiers bow as he passes. His word can save lives or end them. Yet when he lies down at night, his body betrays him. His loneliness stretches like the Bosphorus itself. What use is power if it cannot silence the memory of your mother screaming? As soldiers dragged you away? This is why the Ottomans considered the system genius. It wasn't just about control of bodies, it was control of souls. By breaking boys young, they created men who could never rebel with full hearts. They replaced family with palace love, with duty, humanity with obedience. And in that obedience lay the empire's strength. But do not be fooled into thinking the eunuchs were only victims. Some became the empire's kingmakers. In the 17th century, the chief black eunuch sometimes wielded more influence than the Grand Vizier himself. When ambassadors from Europe came begging for treaties, it was often the eunuch's nod that decided their fate. When rival princes fought for succession, the harem's gates and the eunuchs guarding them determined who would live to see the throne. These mutilated boys became the invisible hands steering empires. And yet, through all the intrigue and all the glittering wealth, one truth gnawed at every eunuch's soul: he would never leave a mark that carried his blood. No child to remember his name, no family to carry his story. His legacy was only what he could build in stone or in politics. Fragile monuments that might crumble the moment a new sultan decided to erase his memory. Think about that. Would you trade the chance to hold your own child for the chance to shape an empire? The Ottomans forced thousands of boys into that question without ever giving them the choice. As the years passed, the contradictions deepened. Eunuchs lived at the center of beauty, yet remained exiled from it. They held power, yet were powerless over their own bodies. They were revered as loyal servants, yet reviled as unnatural beings. Their lives were performances written by others, and they played their roles until death released them. And still, the palace glittered. The fountains sang. The roses bloomed. The women laughed. The Sultan's empire thrived because in the shadows of every triumph, there were boys like you, mutilated, silenced, and turned into living tools of power. But what happens when the empire begins to weaken? When whispers of reform spread? When Europeans start to ask dangerous questions about what lies behind the palace gates? That is when the cracks in the system appear, and even the eunuchs themselves begin to wonder if their suffering was for nothing. The empire does not last forever. No palace, no rose garden, no marble fountain can hold back time. By the 18th century, the Ottoman court begins to creak under its own weight. Linger longer in Istanbul, scribbling notes, their eyes sharper than their compliments. European travelers, with their powdered wigs and quills, write home not just about the domes of Hagia Sophia or the glitter of the Bosphorus, but about the dark rumor that boys vanish in the Sultan's service. Suddenly, the system that once seemed unshakable now looks like a relic of cruelty. But inside the palace walls, the eunuchs continue their routines. The morning prayers, the endless duties, the silent walks through the harem's corridors. They do not notice the empire cracking until it's already happening. Because for them, time has always been strange. The eunuch's life is an endless, present tense. No children to remind them of the past, no future generations to dream about. Only the palace, only today. And yet, even within this timeless prison, change comes creeping. Reformers whisper of modernization, new armies trained in European styles, steam engines roaring into Ottoman ports, and somewhere between the cannon, fire, and the railway smoke, people begin to question whether a system that mutilates boys for service belongs in the modern world. But here's the cruel twisted. You know, the eunuchs themselves sometimes fought to preserve the very system that destroyed them, because power, once tasted, is intoxicating. For the chief black eunuch whose wealth rivals governors, whose words sway sultans, the fall of the system means the fall of his world. Imagine that contradiction. To hate what was done to you, yet cling to the throne it built beneath your feet. European diplomats, horrified by whispers of castration, use it as propaganda. They call the Ottomans barbaric, uncivilized, unworthy of joining the modern nations. Yet these same Europeans conveniently forget their own empires built on slavery, on colonies, on the whip and the chain. Condemning the Ottomans became a mirror trick distract from your own sins by pointing at someone else's history, after all, is written by those who shout the loudest. But let us not pretend the criticism wasn't deserved. Inside the palace, boys were still being broken. The Devshirme, child levy, that once brought Christian boys from the Balkans, was officially abolished in the 17th century. But the empire found new sources. African boys, purchased through slave networks, began to replace the Christian children. Thousands were still mutilated in Cairo, sold at markets, and shipped north to Istanbul. Castration had simply changed geography. The mortality rate remained obscene. Travelers recorded that for every 10 boys castrated, only one survived. Imagine the silence of 9 funerals, the grief of 9 mothers. For every eunuch who stood in silk at the Sultan's gate, survival was not a triumph. It was a lottery where the prize was lifelong exile from humanity. And yet, the survivors held power unlike any other slaves in history. Let's picture John, once a boy from Crete, now Kisler Aker, the chief black eunuch of the Ottoman Empire. His private treasury is filled with jewels. He commissions mosques, schools, fountains that still stand today in Istanbul. He writes letters to ambassadors, controls entry to the Sultan, even influences who sits on the throne. Yet when he dies, there is no son to carry his name, no family to weep at his grave. His wealth is confiscated, his story dissolved. His entire legacy depends on buildings of stone because his bloodline was erased with a knife. That is the tragedy of every eunuch story. Greatness without heirs, power without roots, influence without memory. By the 19th century, the contradictions are too heavy to sustain. The Ottoman Empire, called the sick man of Europe, stumbles toward collapse. Reformers demand modernization. They import French laws, German officers, British machines. But what of the eunuchs? What of the boys still being mutilated in the shadows of progress? Their world shrinks. The harem loses its grip on politics. The Sultan's household is no longer the center of power it once was. Eunuchs still guard the women, still manage the inner court, but their reach into the empire weakens. The tide of history pulls them back inch by inch. Then, in 1908, it breaks. The Young Turk Revolution sweeps across Istanbul like a storm. The Sultan's power collapses. The old palace order is dismantled, and with it, the eunuch system after 5 centuries begins to unravel. The last chief black eunuch is dismissed. The harem itself, once the secret heart of the empire, is dissolved. For the first time in centuries, no boy will be dragged to a table. No knife will descend. No screams will echo in the marble halls. But here's the final cruelty. What happens to the survivors? Imagine being 70 years old, your entire life, built on serving a sultan who no longer sits on the throne. You walk the streets of the new Turkish Republic, no silk robe, no palace key, just another old man with scars no one wants to see. Who are you without the system that made you? Who are you when your very identity eunuch has become a curse of history? Some lived out their days in obscurity, forgotten in rented rooms, whispering memories to no one. A few were pitied, taken in by wealthy families who saw them as relics of a vanished age, but most slipped quietly into graves unmarked by family names, their stories erased by silence. And that silence is perhaps the cruelest part. Ottoman historians of the new republic wanted glory, not shame. They wrote of conquest, of architecture, of tolerance. The eunuchs vanished from the page. European historians, too, preferred to focus on the empire's military clashes, its decline, its diplomacy. They mentioned the eunuchs as curiosities, as exotic figures, but rarely as human beings. So the boys remained ghosts. Their screams at the knife, their whispers in the harem, their silent longing for families that never existed, all swallowed by time. But history has a way of leaving traces. In the archives, palace records whisper of castration rates. In the stones of Istanbul, fountains and mosques bear inscriptions with eunuch names. In the bones unearthed from old cemeteries, archaeologists find evidence of mutilation that cannot be denied. The silence is cracking. The ghosts are speaking. Again, and now the question turns to us. What do we do with their memory? Do we tuck it away, too horrific to face, as past generations did? Or do we look it in the eye and say, this happened, this was real, these boys lived, suffered, and deserve more than silence? Because this is a story of the Ottoman eunuchs is not just a story of the past, it is a mirror. It asks us, how many cruelties do we still bury under words like tradition or necessity? How many lives are still being broken today, hidden in corners we choose not to look at? The systems may have changed, but the logic, the cold calculation of bodies as commodities has not vanished. Every empire builds its monuments on human cost. Rome did it, Byzantium did it, the Ottomans did it. And if we're honest, so do we. The only question is whether we have the courage to count the bodies, to hear the silenced voices, to refuse the comfort of forgetting. So remember the boy you once were, the 8-year-old ripped from his village, dragged down the dusty road. Remember the silence of the palace corridors, the glitter of women you could never touch, the taste of power that never erased the wound. Remember the ghost of the child you lost the day the knife fell. Because if we forget him, then history wins its cruelest victory. The empire may have fallen, the palaces may crumble, but the silence, that is what kills a second time. And that is why we must speak.